Hello everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion entitled Power of Entrepreneurial Thinking. With entrepreneurial thinking being a key part of our Eyes High strategy, we are very pleased to have a great panel here with us to share their thoughts on why being able to think entrepreneurially and act entrepreneurially is so important in today's world. My name is Anju Singh. I work for University Relations at the University of Calgary, and I will be your host for the webinar. Before we proceed, I'd like to take a moment to go over some housekeeping items. Please submit your questions throughout the duration of the webinar. Check the resources provided. They are on your screen. There are links that you can click. Keep the conversation live on Twitter during the webinar using ExploreUCalgary as your hashtag, and please give us your feedback through the survey. The survey is open throughout the duration of the webinar, and you can fill it out at any time. We will leave a little bit of time at the end of the webinar as well for you to answer the survey. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. Unfortunately, one of our panelists, Mary Moran, who is the CEO of the Calgary Economic Development, is not able to make it. She sends her apologies. She's in a city council discussion that she's unable to get away from. So we apologize for her absence as well. But we do have a power-packed panel here, and I will introduce you in just a minute. Introduce the panel in just a minute. So our first panelist is John Brown. He's the Dean and Professor of Architecture at the Faculty of Environmental Design. He's a registered architect and founding principal of Housebrand. His research interests include housing, aging in place, and architectural entrepreneurship. So if I mentioned aging in place as one of his research interests. We have a great video on his research specific to that. That is on our explore.ucalgary.ca website. If you haven't seen it yet, please do take a look. Our next panelist here is Houston Peschel. Houston is instructor of entrepreneurship, innovation, and sustainable development at the Haskins School of Business. He's involved in 7 successful startups, so he has quite a lot to say in our discussion today. Our last panelist is Richard Sigurdsson. Richard is the Dean of Faculty of Arts. His research interests include political theory, Canadian politics, and the politics of nationalism. So we have a really diverse panel here. Typically, when people think of entrepreneurship, they think of business. We do have one person representing the business side of things, but then we have a much broader view which we would like to share about entrepreneurial thinking. So before we get started, though, I just wanted to get a sense of who's in the audience. So take a look. It's a very simple question. Tell us if you're a student at the University of Calgary, if you're a faculty member, if you're a staff member, if you're affiliated with us in any way as an alumnus or alumna or a donor or a volunteer or in some other capacity, or if you're not affiliated with us at all, you're just interested in the topic. So we will give you just a minute to submit your answers. In the meantime, what I wanted to do was quickly cover what our Eyes High strategy is about, because I made reference to it, and entrepreneurial thinking plays a very key role in our strategy. It outlines 3 foundational commitments: sharpening focus on research and scholarship, enriching the quality and breadth of learning, and integrating the community. Woven through all these commitments is student experience and campus culture, and underpinning all of this is entrepreneurial thinking. So we are very pleased to be here to talk about this topic. So let's just look at what our audience is made up of. So we have 10% students, we have about 3% faculty members, we have about 19% who are staff members at the University of Calgary, about 25% are affiliated with us in some way, and about 40% are not affiliated, just interested in the topic. So we have a great mix here of both our internal and external community members. Thank you for being here. So with that, we're going to kick off with our first question. I'm going to be asking each panelist a question. That's a format for this panel discussion. And we'll be inviting the other panel members to join in with their thoughts as well related to that question. So my first question goes to John. John, when we talk about entrepreneurial thinking, most people think immediately of business startups. In fact, that's something that we hear when we are engaging with people both offline and online, because their key understanding of entrepreneurial thinking is that it's connected to business. Is that what entrepreneurial thinking is really about?
Well, I think if you asked each person, they'd probably come up with a different answer to that. From my point of view, I don't think that it is essential. In my world, business startups are really the last step in a much more important process that involves inventing new products, new ways of thinking, new strategies, new processes that are there to disrupt the world as we know it today. So for me, entrepreneurial thinking is about disrupting. It's about changing the status quo in a radical way for social good, and at the same time, hopefully, economic benefit and real change. So if we think about business startups, particularly from a digital side, you know, we think about Airbnb and we think about Uber and Facebook and iPhones, smartphones, that sort of thing. In the world of architecture, landscape architecture and planning that our faculty is engaged in, it's really thinking about what are the disruptions, what are the disruptive strategies that we could use to rethink the way in which we build cities, the way that we operate buildings, the way that we plan our natural landscapes. So for example, an entrepreneurial thinking strategy might be to use digital fabrication to allow each person to custom design their house without having any increase in cost. Imagine what that would mean. Rather than moving into a cookie cutter apartment or a cookie cutter house, you could actually easily move into something which is custom fitted to the way you want to live. That's a disruptive idea, particularly if it can be achieved at scale and at cost. Now that might eventually end up as a business startup. It could also end up as something that gets integrated into the construction industry and doesn't actually require a startup. The key is that the entrepreneurial thinking is about the idea. It's about how can we change the world in a massive way.
Mm-hmm. And it's about thinking about solving an existing problem in a very different way.
That's right.
Okay, that's great. Houston, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that entrepreneurial thinking starts with this idea of problem solving, and specifically that entrepreneurs are people who learn how to solve problems with insufficient resources. They figure out how to do it in a scrappy type of way. And now we've learned that actually you can teach this. And so now I think entrepreneurial thinking is this ability to understand the methodology of problem solving. And once we understand how to teach that, we can teach problem solving in a much more efficient way. And like the panel said, that we have a lot of problems to solve in our society. And so if we pull out the business component and just look at it as a skill for all of our students or our citizens, I think that that's a very important skill as we go forward with the amount of problems that our society faces.
Okay, that's great.
The whole concept of entrepreneurialism can sometimes be a little bit challenging to people. I think that there is sometimes a negative reaction from some people in my community, for instance, some in the arts community, or those who perhaps are not directly involved in business-oriented activities. And they sort of think, oh, well, entrepreneurialism is really about, preaching a particular ideology or worldview, and we kind of are uncomfortable about that. So what I really like about the way our university is approaching this issue is the focus on entrepreneurial thinking. So it really is about the way you come to problems, to issues, to challenges, and you think creatively. In the Faculty of Arts, we've just launched a strategic plan this last May. We want to encourage people to discover and inspire and engage, and we want all of our students, whether they're in psychology or in the performing arts, to be both creative and critical. So I think that critical component can still be built into entrepreneurial thinking the way we're conceiving it here at this university, and I think that's really exciting.
That's great, thank you. And so the next question goes to Houston, and that is, what do entrepreneurial thinkers do differently from everyone else? As someone who teaches this topic, please share your thoughts with us.
Yeah, I think it's a spectrum, so it's not like one day you just wake up, that it's a skill that you develop. We identify in our course that there's about 6 competencies in that, and I think they can all be learned. This methodology of problem solving. Sometimes you hear about the lean startups of build, measure, learn. But more important to me are the traits and skills like empathy, creativity with insufficient resources, how to work functionally in a team, in a high-performance team, and learn how to cooperate and share, understanding that sometimes you fail and learning from those quickly, and hopefully the failures are small and calculated, and so you can continue the momentum. And then finally, I think it's this idea that we have to be more comfortable with uncertainty, that sometimes we don't have the right answers, but we got to try something. With things like climate change or any of the social problems, is just sitting on our hands waiting for a perfect idea or a solution to appear, I don't think is personally the best measure of how to move forward with these wicked problems.
Mm-hmm. Richard, your thoughts on what entrepreneurial thinkers do differently from others?
Well, I think that we've touched on a couple of the things, and it really is, I think, a creative endeavor in many ways, because entrepreneurial thinking to me means always exploring and trying to find new and different ways to achieve your goal, and now that could be a business-related goal, that could be a socially innovative goal. You could be working for a nonprofit. You could just be trying to solve issues within your own organization as a public servant. But I think it's that creative way that you try to find new and different ways to engage the problem. And I think also I was glad to hear Houston talk about team building and working as a team, because I think often we think of entrepreneurs as some single person out there who comes up with a new widget and it's their new great idea and they're all on their own. That's actually not the way it normally works, is it? I mean, I think that normally there's a whole series of interactions, and we as university educators really have, I think, an obligation to put our students in opportunities to be able to work creatively with other people, because that's the world. That's how they're going to go out there, and that's how they're going to be able to explore their entrepreneurial side and to be able to find new solutions and new ways to do things. And so, I'm very excited again by the kinds of things that my colleagues are doing in other faculties that I know in the Faculty of Arts. We're trying to move in this direction as much as we can as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. For me, I agree with everything that's been said. The one piece I would add is the notion of courage. I think that entrepreneurs have to be courageous. They have to be prepared to fail. And you're going to fail 9 times out of 10 in order to get to that one. And I think that our traditional education system maybe doesn't encourage that as much. I think a lot of our business environments don't encourage that as much as they probably should, that it's okay to fail. It's okay to get it wrong, because that's just one step towards getting it right. The other interpretation of courage is I think you have to have the courage to not just be prepared to put up with the way it is. The world exists. There's climate change. And you might say, gosh, what are we ever going to do? Just me. What can I do about climate change? Therefore, I'm not going to worry about it. Entrepreneurial thinking is to say, you know what? I actually am going to do something about that. There is a way. There is a different way of thinking. And sometimes that smallest little change can have a dramatic shift in the way in which the whole world is seen. Think about the way Henry Ford took transportation from horse-drawn carriage to automobile, which then ultimately led to a man on the moon. I mean, it's that sort of, we're not just trying to build or breed bigger horses. We're going to do something that's completely different. And I think that's the great opportunity, but it requires the courage of your convictions.
Well, if I could jump in, John, you used the word courage, and I think the word risk is also very important here, and it's much more common, I think, in business schools and business environments to talk about risk, and you have to be able to take risks. So it just so happened that at the event I was at this morning, I spoke with a group of individuals, all of whom work in NGOs or the civil society areas here in Calgary, with immigrant centers, newcomer society, with helping disadvantaged mothers, and so I was talking to this group of people, and I just said to them, well, at noon I'm going to be talking about entrepreneurialism. And is that at all important in your world? And their eyes just lit up, and they said, absolutely, we need more entrepreneurial thinking in civil society. We have to be able to come to these problems in that kind of challenging way. And one of the women said, and we need more risk. We need to have people come into the civil society field, working in NGOs that are willing to take a risk and to be able to try new things because there's so much at stake in our community. And so I think that's also key to entrepreneurial thinking.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, because there are so many deep-seated paradigms and problems, and if you're not having people approach them in a new way, it never goes away.
Yeah.
So, thank you, Richard. And so the next question is for you.
Right.
And you did talk a little bit about this, but if you could expand a little more, that would be great. How does entrepreneurial thinking relate to your specific discipline for sector?
Able to gain the kind of skills and knowledge that will allow them to do whatever they want to do when they leave university, to become entrepreneurs, to work in an entrepreneurial environment in the more sort of straightforward sense. And we have always, I think, in faculties of arts provided all sorts of things that are very important to entrepreneurs to be able to move forward, to be literate, to be numerate, to be able to understand markets and all of those sorts of things. And what I also like to say actually is that there are some areas in our faculty that you might not think of right away, but I would say that our most entrepreneurial students are probably our art students, or maybe our dance or music students, because they know if they are going to shift for themselves out in that world, if they're going to have a career in the cultural industries, as we call them now, they have to be able to sort of sell their product. They have to be able to create the environment in which they're going to be able to succeed. And so, there are some terrific examples of that. So, for instance, we have an art class where a key component of it is to be able to go out into the community and to essentially market your art. And there's actually a partnership with a law firm downtown that puts on an event every year where our students get to interact with people who would probably be interested in buying art, and they have to be there and sell their art essentially. So, so we have an interest in that kind of sort of traditional entrepreneurial thinking, and our students are very interested in that. But I think our students are also interested in the broader sense of that term, in terms of having the kinds of skills and abilities that will allow them to move out into the world and to interact with problems in a creative and critical way. And that doesn't always mean actually solving problems. Actually, in the faculty of arts, we often say we don't solve any problems, we just find more problems. And that in itself, I think, is a creative thing to be able to do. But to be able to come to these kinds of issues, okay, we have to, we would like to make life better for working mothers and provide opportunities for them for greater child care. How can we put these things together and come up with some solutions for our own community that are going to be socially beneficial? So sometimes we talk about social innovation and being able to encourage our students to be able to find new and different ways to do whatever it is that they want to do. And so I think that the Faculty of Arts is very committed to finding opportunities for our students to think more broadly in that way, in an entrepreneurial sense.
Yes, and in today's world, which is changing so often, to have some of those skills in place so that you're constantly innovating your own career is also a very important skill to walk out with.
Yeah, well, as people often say, the kind of job that you're going to have when you leave university now is not going to be the same one you're going to have, 20 years, 40 years down the road. You could be very much having to make and create your own opportunities as you go forward, and I think that's very much the case.
Okay. John?
Yeah, I guess in our world, I think the big advantage of entrepreneurial thinking, the promise, the potential, opportunity of entrepreneurial thinking really comes down to impact. I mean, we are creative disciplines. We design all kinds of things, all kinds of futures, and unfortunately, a lot of those get left on the drawing table or the computer screen because there's a bit of a disconnect within the industry, within our profession, about, well, then how do you do that? You're waiting for an enlightened client to come along and say, I've got this problem, and it just happens to be the problem that you've been thinking about and you've got the ready solution to. What I think so cool about entrepreneurial thinking is that it empowers the creator to say, well, I don't just have to have this and say, gee, I wish somebody would do this. You can actually go out and do that yourself. Now, what that requires is a new set of skills, which is why we need interdisciplinary education and why we need to integrate the skills that Houston is providing to his students. We need to offer that across the board so that it empowers people to be able to deliver that kind of impact and take an idea to fruition.
I'm going to kind of just two quick points. The first one is you know, if we back up a bit, Dr. Derek Hasse from the Haskayne School of Business many years ago started this idea of entrepreneurial thinking in Haskayne. And when he started talking to the downtown companies that were hiring our students, they were all saying, look, the amazing job at producing accountants and finance and marketing, the traditional sectors, but they were looking for more students that had the skills of problem solving. And so through donors, we were able to create NT317, that's the mandatory course for all second-year business students. So 800 students go through it. And what we realized was there was a bit of resistance because the teaching entrepreneurial thinking isn't black and white. How do you measure empathy? How do you give a grade to somebody on empathy or creativity on some of these things?
Exactly.
And so what I learned as coming from an entrepreneurial background was I had to solve the problem of how do I teach this course? Large 75 students, you know, 12 lectures. There's the RBC Fast Pitch at the end, which is a huge event. And so I had to provide actually my own entrepreneurial thinking to the course. And so we moved to an open educational resource because there was no textbooks available. We flipped the classroom on it so it's now all experiential activities in there. And so, you know, Haskayne, I think, is doing some really interesting things in its teaching and learning area to be able to teach business in a different way so that our graduates are having the skills that they need to be successful, as well as other faculty, students from other faculties coming into our faculty and learning these skills so that it's open to all. And I think that's what's the most exciting thing, is that we started the energy at the USC, and I think we can be leaders in it globally.
So I'll ask you another follow-up question, which is, so how do you measure empathy, courage, ability to creatively solve a problem?
So it's a good question. Actually, we just wrapped up our results to see if our open educational resource and approach actually measures it. So I can let you know in about a month once our amazing research assistants crunch the data. But right now, my gut is demonstrating that the best way to do that is actually to have them try and start an innovative company. Not just a company, but an innovative company. The thing there is they fail because they realize it exists, or they can't monetize it, or it's too small of a customer segment. Or the wrong one. And so I have to reward failure in the class. And sometimes groups will fail 13 times. They'll start an idea and realize it's wrong. And all of that is through primary research. They have to get out and talk to people. We're not allowed to go look on you know, the internet. And so that process of going to talk to people helps with empathy. You know, going to realize that, hey, this isn't going to work, fail fast, fail quickly. And then, you know, going on to the next project really rewards this idea of uncertainty. Like, I hope it works, but let's figure out the smallest experiment that we can do to figure out if it's worth pursuing. And so that's the way I've approached it, and so far it's been fun. But we'll know at the end of this month of how successful we are. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, that's great. Would anyone else like to weigh in? Okay, so with that we move to the next question, which is for John. How does entrepreneurial thinking create interdisciplinary or intersectoral opportunities and solutions? I think you alluded to that a little bit, but you can elaborate.
Well, I think we've talked about it probably in each of our responses so far. You can't go very far on your own in doing anything substantive. The issues facing the world are wickedly complex, and they require multiple viewpoints, multiple expertise, and I think entrepreneurial thinking gives us a framework, a ground, almost I won't say common language, but a framework that multiple disciplines can use to collaborate. So Richard was talking about affordable housing, you know, making a comment about that, and you know, that's an issue for us as well, right? Architects build housing, and planners help zone the city in order to allow that to happen. And so we can think about what are innovations and disruptions that we might be able to do in terms of technology to reduce energy costs or to change the configuration of the building and all of that. But unless it involves people from the arts disciplines that are talking about civil society and the social equity and all of those components and the innovations of that, the innovations of how they're financed, the innovations of how they're put together and managed and operated, all we're doing is coming up with incomplete solutions. And really, I think, to have impact, it has to be a complete solution, and that complete solution is going to come out of the synthesis of a variety of different approaches working together. And entrepreneurial thinking, I think, gives us a way of working together where we're not trying to take on somebody else's discipline. Architects don't need to work as psychologists and sociologists, and financiers don't need to be planners, but we can all be entrepreneurs at the same time from our own discipline. And that, I think, is the power.
Absolutely. Mr. Would you like to add to that?
I know. I think you've done an excellent job on that, honestly. Yeah, I'll pass to see.
And in the real world, that's what it looks like. You are working with people from different disciplines, solving problems, but this is taking it up to the next level.
Yeah, I think that one of the something that both John and you mentioned in different ways. You talked about the wickedly complex world in which we live, and you talked about how in your students you try to make sure that they can work with uncertainty, and I think that that's really important in this day and age. Our students, when they go off, say off into the world, and they'll come, they'll go, they'll still be connected to us. But when you're decision making, often you don't have all of the you don't have all of the information that's going to be able to lead you to have a surety that this outcome will be there. And I think one of the things that has always characterized entrepreneurial activities, entrepreneurial thinking and approaches, is almost an embrace of that uncertainty. That you don't know how this product is going to work. You don't know what's going to happen from this venture, but you're willing to go out there, throw yourself into it, and try to find ways to really make the most of the opportunities that are out there. And I think that kind of approach is important to all walks of life and all sorts of things that people are going to be doing out there in the world right now. And if you think of just about every occupation, if you think of just being a citizen in the world, frankly, you have to deal with uncertainty, and you have to be able to take certain risks. You have to be able to deal with complex information as it comes forward, and then make your best guess. And let's try to move forward, but let's try to move forward. Let's try to get things done. And I think that really is also the spirit of the entrepreneurial way of looking at things. And again, it's something that really characterizes our university, and I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, and that goes back to your point about impact, right? Like, what kind of impact will you really have? So the next question is for Houston, and we touched upon this a little bit, but some elaboration would be great. How do you teach students to identify opportunities? Is it something you're either born with or not?
Yeah, it's funny because when I first started teaching this course, everyone came with a solution. I have an app. I have something, and so they had a solution, but they didn't do a good job identifying the problem that can be monetized. And so, this course does require you to monetize it, meaning you're going to make money at the solution. But that isn't the case for all problem solvings. But for the course, we always start with this idea of a problem. And is it we call it a mosquito bite, something that's kind of annoying, but you'll pay to get rid of it? Is it a shark bite that you really have to get it solved? Or is it something that's just kind of a nuisance and nobody will really monetize the solution? Meaning, when I ask the students, how many of you have bought an app lately? No one puts their hands up, but they all want to make an app that someone's going to buy. And so it's understanding the problem and the opportunities within that problem. Because sometimes the problem, You have to look at it and say, yes, that's a problem, but if I have to figure out how to monetize it, someone needs to solve it in a creative way. And that's when we go to the art students or architecture or engineering or med school, and we start to figure out maybe some innovative ways. And through that journey of exploration, of trying, of talking to people, you pivot the ideas as you go along. And so I think the opportunity isn't as clear at the beginning, but if you start from the ground of kind of problem solving and what we call the pain points, or being empathetic to the people with the pain or the problem, you can then start to be a little bit more strategic in the way you put your resources to solve the problem. So it is a challenge for the students. It's really, really hard for them, and they do get frustrated, and that frustration is where the learning happens.
Yeah, and that's true for any kind of problem, to your point.
Yeah.
It's not just about monetization from that particular problem.
Yeah.
And that answers the follow-up question as well, which is, what are your recommendations for someone who wants to develop their entrepreneurial muscle or skills? It's about understanding the problem first. Right?
Yeah, and just to build on that really quickly, you know, I was just listening to Uber and Tesla both having issues with their autonomous driving vehicles, having killed some people. And when I thought about that problem, it's like the entrepreneur, the business person isn't really going to solve that. This is going to come down to the philosophers, ethicists, you know, people building the algorithms for how do they code these things. So I think the problem solving in some of these big organizations, to develop them doesn't mean you have to do a startup. You don't have to be the heropreneur in a sense. You can be involved in a problem that is in not-for-profit, in policy, in whatever it is, but take the same methodology that entrepreneurs have proven to be successful in solving it quickly and ideally with the limited resources you have.
Thank you. How are you doing it in the Faculty of Arts, Richard? Teaching students to identify opportunities, think entrepreneurially.
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, our new strategic plan identifies entrepreneurial thinking in several elements of what we want to do, primarily around teaching and learning, but also we want to encourage our faculty members to come up with new research projects and new ways of exploring what entrepreneurialism means, what it can do, what kind of learning boosts entrepreneurial thinking in a variety of ways. So I think that we have a number of, again, as I call them, more traditional opportunities to learn the kinds of skills necessary around entrepreneurial thinking, but we're also trying to go beyond that. So we've been developing courses, for instance, in the fine arts, the performing arts, as well as the visual arts, around, again, what I would call the cultural industries, and are you going to be able to market? Are you going to be able to work as a promoter of arts? But also in areas like film, media, so things like gaming. Our students are very interested in developing new kinds of not so much programs, but creative thinking around that. And I'm going to sort of bleed into a question that you were going to ask Mary, I think, about Calgary. And I think that right now, it's a particularly great time to be thinking about this. Now, the University of Calgary has always, I think, been an entrepreneurial university at the heart of a very entrepreneurial city, and so that synergy is very much there. And this is one of the reasons why I think we really are a university out front of just about everybody else, certainly in Canada, around entrepreneurial thinking. And it's a real signature for us because of the kind of city that we are, and the entrepreneurial spirit that's been here. But let's face it, things are changing. And the things that have been the strength of our economy here in Calgary and in Alberta, they're being challenged. I mean, it's not going to be a strictly extraction-based economy here in Calgary. But we have the talent, and we're, I think, really in the place to be able to develop the kind of talent that's going to be able to make opportunities as we go forward. So things like the information business, the software technology, all of these kinds of things are going to be absolutely important as we move forward. So just to throw out an example, the provincial government did provide funding for a terrific studio, soundstage, and everything we hear to help spur on the film and entertainment industry here in Calgary. But you know what? We're still importing people from Toronto or Vancouver to do what's called sort of the above the line, really, critical work to be producers, to get the money to put a production forward, to do the screenwriting even, to be able to coordinate the efforts that have to go on there. So what we need to do, I think, as a community is to be able to generate those people that can do the above the line, the really higher value work in the cultural industries, in software development, these kinds of industries that are really, I think, the future for us here in Calgary.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for bringing up that question that we would no longer have asked had you not brought it up, which is, what does a made in Calgary or made at UCalgary solution really look like when we think about entrepreneurial thinking? I will invite anyone to take it. Richard has just answered it.
Well, I think we sort of answered that in all of our responses. I don't think that a lot of people are talking about entrepreneurial thinking. I think that the Made in Calgary, the Made in University of Calgary idea is particularly interesting because of its breadth. That it isn't just about startups. Of course, the world works on money, and somewhere the money comes. It might be direct monetization. It might be through other means for nonprofits. But it all works through that way. From our point of view, I think that the piece within the architecture, landscape architecture, and planning world that is different is we're trying to go using the terms that Richard just used to get above the line. A lot of people go into our professions and it's a kind of service work, right? You wait until a developer comes and says, "I've got this idea to do that," and then off you go and you work through that. And that is just like the production of a film. What we need to do is for our graduates to see themselves as above the line, that they're the ones that can identify a project, that can identify a need, that could say, you know what, we really need to do this. Put together the project and then go look for the funding. It's not just the people with the money that have the good ideas. And to me, I think that is also a form of entrepreneurial thinking, and I think that's distinctive, at least to our program, in the way that we approach it.
I think this idea of an innovative city or an entrepreneurial thinking city and university comes down to cooperation and collaboration among all groups. And I think, Mary from CED, I've worked with their group and they've done a great job of trying to bring everyone together. So now a lot of the institutions, Mount Royal, Ambrose, these other post-secondary SAIT are talking about this, and there's more collaboration outside of the university as well. Plus we have an amazing things like the Hunter Hub, which is now saying this is a university. It's a Mac Hall. It's a a neutral space in a sense, but it allows students to come in and just try. And there's so many amazing events in our university and outside of the city. And I tell my students that now is probably one of the best times to try an idea because of the amount of grants and support and funding and excitement around it. There's so much resources and support, so the risk goes down. And I think that that's something that we've done very well as an institution at USC, but also that the City of Calgary is really trying to embrace. So I think with all the support we have, we are a very innovative city, and we will grow it even further.
Exactly, and if Mary were here, that's what she would say. Entrepreneurial thinking is part of the DNA of our city, and especially in times like these, to amp it up and to provide everyone with the the framework that they need to act entrepreneurially is particularly important and quite exciting. So thank you for that. And with the next question, can embracing entrepreneurial thinking by faculty and staff at universities benefit the university as well as the community? So that is a question for you, Richard. We'll start with you. You did cover it a little bit.
Well, yes, I think clearly the connection between the university and the community is crucially important. The University of Calgary is what it is right now because of its location in a city like Calgary. And great universities are great because of their location in many ways. And great cities are built with great universities. And that kind of connection is really, really important. But let's think even sort of beyond that and talk about some of the other communities that can benefit from entrepreneurial thinking, and that I think we as university educators have an obligation to consider as we look at what kind of programming we want to put forward, what kind of opportunities we want to create for our students and for the community. And so I'll just mention sort of 3 different sort of groups or identifiable participants that I think can benefit particularly from entrepreneurial thinking, and that would be I think that female entrepreneurs need to be nurtured more and supported more, and I think the university has a crucial role to play there. I think that if you look at the demographics of Calgary, some people don't realize it, but we are the 3rd most diverse city in Canada, behind Toronto and Vancouver, and I think a lot of newcomers to our city come with a great deal of entrepreneurial spirit, but they need direction, they need help, they need support. And I think also that our Indigenous communities are really sort of starving for opportunities to be able to do entrepreneurial work in their own way, the way they want to do it. But they, so I think that universities can contribute in all those 3 ways. And I know that there's been some really crucial things that are being done. I know that the Hunter Hub has some particular interests around, getting our female students, not just in the sciences, but in other areas as well, to think entrepreneurially and to find opportunities. And I think there's some tremendous startups, tremendous businesses that are being run and created by young females today. But there's a particular, I think, support and particular encouragement that is needed there. And we've got some great role models here in this city. So that's I think a win-win. Likewise, again, for the newcomers to our city. I've spoken to many of the newcomers and the groups that are supporting them, and these are people that have, talk about risk, in some cases risked everything to come here, and they have a great deal of desire to be able to move forward and and find their way, but they do need support, and the university I think has an obligation to be providing that kind of support for them. And then finally, the university has launched its new Indigenous strategy just recently, and I think one of the crucial elements there is what in political science we used to call sort of more self-determination for First Nations. We don't use that term quite as much anymore, but very much in those communities there's sort of a self-directed desire to be able to move forward and capitalize on the opportunities. It might be a more collective community-based operation, so we have to be sensitive to the distinctiveness of First Nations businesses, especially reserve-based, but there's a great desire, I think, to think entrepreneurially and to act entrepreneurially in the Indigenous communities in southern Alberta. And we as a university, I think, also have a great role to play in encouraging those groups.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because there's some research out of Haskell School of Business that directly correlates entrepreneurship with a strong sense of community. And when you think about where we live, which is Calgary, with a strong sense of community where people feel like they will be supported if they fall, is very critical to actually boosting entrepreneurship, and probably that explains why we see so much of it in our city. As it relates to our faculty and staff, though, what kind of work can they be doing, and how does embracing entrepreneurial thinking by them benefit our community? And what are some examples?
I think that the post-secondary industry, education industry, is currently potentially being disrupted. Is that there's a lot of other ways to get knowledge now. There's a lot of new entrants into the market of giving skills or teaching. And so I think we as faculty and staff need to say, how are we best preparing our students when they graduate as a post-secondary institution? Because you hear Google and IBM now saying that there's not that amazing correlation between GPA and great staff. What is that they come with these skills and then they become great staff. So even the businesses that will hire, whether it's in the film industry, architecture industry, they need to have those skills. And I think as a post-secondary institution, we sometimes have to question, how are we teaching this in the classroom? How can we be more disruptive in our own jobs? How can we support the next generation to learn in new ways that's exciting and is most valuable, and when they leave, they are more actualized in these skills. And I think that's the responsibility that lies on our faculty and staff.
So one example of that in our world relates to the third pillar of the Eyes High strategy, which is connecting to community. And how can we develop learning opportunities, experiential learning opportunities for our budding professionals to work with communities that may not otherwise be able to hire professional level consulting, to be able to go out and enable those entrepreneurs or those people with a pressing need. So I think that, you know, we're not just teaching up in this ivory tower, looking at ourselves. It really, I think the University of Calgary defines itself as being outwardly focused. And how do we connect and enable others within our community that aren't just our students, but the community as a whole? How do we enable them in this new reality?
Okay, thank you. And finally, we have one last prepared question. And I think, again, we have sort of covered it, but if you have any final thoughts on this, do you think it's important for universities to focus on entrepreneurial thinking? And why is it important for students to learn these skills? I think we've pretty much covered this, but if you have additional thoughts related to that,
I think if you don't, you're going to get left behind.
Mm-hmm.
I really do.
Yeah, and I think also, though, we're defining entrepreneurial thinking in a, you can define that in a particular kind of way, but let's think. I mean, what's going to be the next Facebook or Uber, Google? We don't know. We're sitting around this table. We don't know. But how are we going to get there? Who is going to be the person that's going to help move us forward? It's going to be someone who has been encouraged in their curiosity, encouraged to develop the kind of skills that are needed to be able to then take that curiosity and start to apply it in ways that that involve risk, but also involve a certain amount of cleverness as we move forward. And those students are in our classrooms right now. Mm-hmm. And so I think we have a lot to be optimistic about in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just think we have to be able to give our students the ability that it's not about predicting the future, but you can actually help control the future if you learn the method. And so, entrepreneurial thinking is a methodology similar to the scientific method. And we don't all become Einsteins, as Sarah Vathi says from Darden. She talks about how we can all learn the scientific method. And it's the same thing. We just need to learn the entrepreneurial thinking method. And then what we do with that is up to us. What we're inspired to do, our intrinsic motivation to change the world for a better place, takes you in whatever direction it is. But if we empower them to have that methodology and the resources, the mentorship, and the skills to try it out, because it's experiential. You don't memorize and dump this. You got to experience it. And so the more opportunities we give them to come to hackathons or go work with a startup or like the Creative Destruction Lab, CDL, bringing great ideas into the university and partnering them with students, and those mashups, I think, are going to give the students the experience of what entrepreneurial thinking is, and then they'll be confident in trying it in the future.
Thank you very much. This has been a great discussion. There are a ton of audience questions that have come in. So what I'm going to do is ask the question, and please feel free to pick up and answer based on your interest. So one question is, feeling that we are supported if we fall is critical. How do we create the support, especially when funding may be limited or wasted?
Could you repeat the question one more time? I just want to make sure that
feeling that we are supported if we fail is critical. So that feeling of support, we say failure is we fail fast and all of that stuff. How do we create the support, especially when limited funds may be wasted?
Well, I'll take this on from the point of view of faculty. I think one of the ways that we do that is that we have to redefine the way we measure success. That success isn't always a successful outcome. Success is defined by trying. Success is about innovation, and it's about failure just as much. And so we grade people on the number of questions they get right. Well, maybe we need to grade people according to other metrics. How adventuresome was your exploration of the topic?
I'd love to build on that. At the end of every semester, and it just happened last week, is I ask my students to, this is a new course, beat it up. What did you like and what can improve? And it comes down to our students are very motivated by success and failure is their GPA, is their marks. And so when they're driven to get an A and now they're dealt with a problem that, how do you actually grade this? It is, I think, a very important discussion in our faculty right now is how do you reward intrinsic motivation and keep them comfortable? And I think to the question is we need to give more opportunities to students to try this in a safe and controlled way with the mentorship that they have. And then as they learn through those, they'll be more productive, and I think the failures are going to be smaller.
Thank you. And that whole question of evaluation and measurement of these types of things which are not straightforward knowledge but actually skill-based is something that our Taylor Institute of Teaching and Learning as well is working very actively on as we make the shift from including some of the skills as part of our evaluation as well. So another question is, will this accelerate diversifying Alberta's economy? What resistance does entrepreneurial thinking receive, if any?
Well, back to something I said earlier, I think that it's absolutely essential to diversify the economy, and I think that we're facing that reality. I think more and more governments in Alberta. This will be my political science comment. The last 40 years have been talking about diversification, but they haven't really had as much at stake. It was easier to fall back on, traditional revenue streams and traditional ways of organizing our political economy. I think those days are over, and I don't think that's a particularly bad thing for Calgary or for Alberta. I think there are huge opportunities here. We are a young workforce, or a well-educated workforce that has a culture and history of entrepreneurial thinking and activity. We're a young, dynamic university that is very much connected to that community. And so I think it is going to happen, it is happening right now, that entrepreneurial thinking is contributing to the diversification of the Calgary economy and to the Alberta economy generally. This is absolutely necessary. It's something that's happening, something that everyone is talking about. I know if Mary Moran was here, she would be so excited about this and be able to use greater examples. But just to throw it out, I had no idea whether we had any chance ever to get Amazon. But going through that process was incredibly, I think, educative for the community, for civic leaders, for university leaders, for business leaders, to be able to do almost an audit of where we're at, where are our gaps, and I think that those gaps are going to be filled by entrepreneurial activity now that they have been more clearly identified.
So I would add to that I think diversification is a natural byproduct of all that, and hopefully that builds our economy. But I think my hope is that if it's truly entrepreneurial, it's not just doing that. It's also making the world better. It's creating social innovation. It's making the world more equitable. It's making it more sustainable. It's making it more resilient. Where those are not seen as we can either do social good or we can have a full economy. We should be able to do both. That's the real entrepreneurial challenge, is not seeing that dichotomy. So yes, we're going to build our economy, but we're going to do it by at the same time building a better Alberta, a fairer Alberta, a more sustainable Alberta.
Thank you. So the next question is, if you're a student and wanting your professors to be more courageous about how your education is shaped, to include more acceptance of failure and courageous exploration of uncharted territory, how do you recommend they initiate a constructive discussion about it?
Good question. That's a very thoughtful question. Yeah.
I think just engage. I think our faculty needs to just be engaged by our students and go knock on the door, and it's about just making those reach out and have that conversation. It might seem intimidating, it might seem that they're too busy, but at the end of the day, I think we're all here for the same purpose, that we love the areas of academics, research, teaching, and I think the more the students voice what they want, then we can be entrepreneurial thinkers ourselves and figure out how to deal with their problems or their suggestions on improvements.
I think you also have to be a little strategic about that there are some areas of the university where entrepreneurial thinking is more integrated into coursework than it is in others, and I think that you want to start in those areas. You want to start with faculty members that are asking those questions, and the Teaching and Learning Center, and then build out from there. It might be an uphill grind to go to a very conventional mainstream kind of course and say, I want to, what are you going to do for me as an entrepreneur? That might not be the best venue to start that, at least now. 5 years from now, I think it'll be wide open.
Yeah, it's a bit of a complex issue, actually, because I think a lot of times students, even in more traditional classes, don't always realize fully the extent to which the skills and abilities that they're going to learn in that class are going to contribute to their ability to be successful entrepreneurs down the road. And it's simply not the case that each and every class in our university should be okay, let's start a business, and your grade is going to be determined by whether you started a chemistry business or not that solves some issue. That's not the way it's going to work or should work. I do think that as an academy, we are moving towards more and more opportunities for experiential learning. And if you look at our university's new academic plan that goes along with the revised Eyes High strategy, it's very clear about the opportunities that we want to create for our students around greater experiential learning, and that could be internships, it could be some more co-op, but also the kinds of things that have really been pioneered by the Taylor Institute for Teaching and Learning. And so I know that in my own faculty there has been a huge uptake. People are actually lined up to try to get into the Taylor to teach, to try out new ways of thinking that are more experiential, and we have to find ways to make that happen. In some cases, there's a cost. More experiential learning is often a little bit more expensive, and we're trying to find ways to make sure that we can do that. So, I think that the students are right to be asking for this, and we are certainly trying to find greater opportunities for them.
One quick example what we're doing at Haskayne is we're doing teaching squares, so that 4 profs or instructors will get together and all go and sit in each other's class and just give them feedback, and then you go for a pint after a cup of coffee, and you discuss what you saw. Wow, I liked that activity, but I didn't really get that. Yeah. And sometimes there's a reason why we've developed a course over these years, and sometimes the students don't understand the journey. And so what I usually do is I say, well, if we didn't have this is what would happen. Like, there's sometimes consequences, as well as we need to make sure that our teaching and learning objectives are achieved. And to be fully experiential and achieve learning objectives is quite challenging. So I think there's some really cool innovations taking place at USC.
Thank you. We are almost coming to the end of our time, but I'll take this one last audience question, and it is from our alumni community, someone in our alumni community. How can alumni incorporate entrepreneurial thinking, and how can they help?
Can I jump in?
Yes.
One of the things that we're looking at doing more of in the Faculty of Arts, I think, is providing mentoring opportunities for our alumni, so that we can have our alumni who've gone off and done wonderful, interesting things to be able to connect with our current students as mentors, to be able to find out what their interests are and then help point them in the right direction. And a lot of our alumni are very interested in doing this, and so we're starting to take steps where we can find that. I know in other areas that's been more common, especially in professional faculties, where the student is going off in a direction likely to be similar to the work that's done by your alumni. In the Faculty of Arts, that's not the case, right? Our alumni are off doing a million different things, so it's a little bit more of a challenge sometimes times. But I think that mentoring role is something absolutely that we would like to see alumni be able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. In the professional faculties, it's really key, and there's a tacit knowledge that comes from practice. Right? They are equivalent experts in to the academic researchers that are teaching, and the ability for them to come back and share their expertise and also learn what's going on at the cutting edge of sort of bright, enthusiastic young minds is a really nice symbiotic relationship.
I'm very fortunate we have 250 volunteers in my course. Like today, right after this, I'll have 6 of our alumni and business community judging our students. And so advising, beating them up on their ideas, challenging them on it. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities. And for that person who wrote the question, contact the Hunter Center. I know that they're always looking for community experts, because these students come up with crazy ideas and they need to have a diversity on the panels, especially, gender. Is more female alumni getting involved would be great as well. That's a great way to do it.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. This has been a great discussion. There are a few closing things that I wanted to cover with our audiences. The link to the recording to this webinar will be sent to you later on today or perhaps tomorrow. Please don't forget to fill out the survey. You can sign up for our other webinars, download our ebooks, and watch some of our videos at ucalgary.ca/explore/collections. We have a bunch of really great content there on a diverse number of topics. Also, email your ideas for other webinar topics to us at exploreucalgary@ucalgary.ca. And with that, we will come to the end of this webinar. Thank you once again to our panel for attending. And we will have the next round of webinars published on our website, explore.ucalgary.ca, in June. It is a very interesting topic, so don't forget to come back and check. And with that, I would like to sign off. Thank you once again, and thank you to our audiences. We are sorry we were not able to take all the questions, but we love your participation. Continue to participate. Until next time.